There we go. Thank you. Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Tonight is meant to be a presentation, and we'll take comments and questions at the end, both in person as well as over the phone. We are streaming this meeting, so it can be watched later on YouTube and the city's Facebook page. My name is Christina Anderson. I'm the city planner and deputy director of community planning and economic development. We have Bobby Durkee here, who's the assistant city planner. And so when we get to the Q&A or we want to make comments, we have a microphone that we'll bring around to you. Since we're streaming, we want to make sure those at home can hear and get that all together. Again, the point of the meeting tonight is to talk about where we've been in the zoning code update and what changes have been made and what the timeline is moving, or approximate timeline moving here forward. For those of you who have been at these presentations before, you will have seen this first part, but I want to make sure it's always good to kind of talk about the why we're updating the zoning code. So forgive me if it's repeat for you, and perhaps anyone in the audience who hasn't been here before, this will be new information, as well as those watching at home. So here's what we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to be talking about the zoning code and the map amendments, kind of the why and the how behind this process. And we're going to be talking specifically about outreach and what has happened thus far. I'm going to highlight some of the changes in the draft, the second draft of the zoning code and map, and then start to talk about what we expect the next steps to be. So first of all, just a reminder of why we update our zoning codes. We typically update them after a master plan is done. So community vision set, you want to make sure that the zoning code is in alignment with that vision. So they're working together to guide development throughout the city. If you go to the 2025 master plan, you'll see in the back at the Imagine Kalamazoo at Work section, there is a goal about updating the zoning code and a series of tasks related to that. And so that's what's guiding our work to do this. All of our work in the city, whether it is everyday activities, building streets, clearing streets, water lines, to reviewing plans and everything in between, everything that the city does ties back to the strategic vision. Specifically, I want to highlight some of the strategic vision goals that relate to the zoning code. Again, all of our work is always grounded in this. So things like good governance, which is making sure that we have updated codes, updated documents, that it can be understood by all, clearly interpreted and used. Complete neighborhoods, which is thinking about our neighborhoods as not just residential entities alone, but what are the other elements that combine to kind of serve those that live in the neighborhood, things like access to daily needs, commercial uses, open space, schools, transportation options, and housing options. Connected City is having those transportation options throughout the city, and making sure that we're looking at different streets that serve different functions and how they should be developed accordingly. Economic vitality, making sure that we have zoning standards, particularly for commercial, which is what this project is primarily focused on, that are supporting business development within our community. And environmental responsibility. We have our community sustainability plan, which influenced some of the standards in this code, as well as the natural features protection overlay section in the code. I already mentioned the master plan, right? It's tied to, has very clear tasks to update the zoning code. And the master plan also tells staff to make sure that we're creating standards in the zoning code that align land use and transportation. Because you want those two things to kind of work in harmony, right? You wouldn't necessarily put a single-family home fronting a 5-lane road. Those two things aren't necessarily compatible. So how do you think about those two elements to create neighborhoods, create senses of place? We have been updating our zoning code slowly since we approved the master plan in 2017. The zoning code has been housed in the Municipal Code of Ordinances, which is a long set of ordinances that regulate just about everything in the city. And in that, Appendix A is where the zoning code has been housed. When we started to update the process, we realized that we weren't just going to be editing Appendix A. We probably needed to start a fresh new document. And so as we've done this work, we have very slowly pulled things out of A. I say we run them through the wash, kind of review them, understand if they are still needed, what it looks like, how should they change or not. And then we go into Chapter 50, which is also in the Municipal Code, which is what houses our new, which is where the zoning code will be fully located soon. And so we have done a variety of incremental updates to the zoning code since 2017, and we'll continue to do so over the next year until we have everything out of Appendix A and into Chapter 50. And so a lot of the changes that are being brought forth now are things that are existing in Chapter 50, but are being moved over as opposed to brand new materials. I will be putting this on the PowerPoint online too, if anybody wants a copy of it, and I can email you a copy as well. So some of the outreach activities that occurred this spring, we did 3 outreach meetings across the city. We did one at the library, one on K College's campus, down by the athletic fields and Western's track. We did one in the Edison Neighborhood Association. We had a variety of board presentations and discussions at the City Commission level, Plan Commission level, and Natural Features Protection Review Board level to discuss pieces of the code with those boards. At the beginning of this process, we sent an email, a letter to all property owners and occupants, letting them know that this process was started, where all the information would be housed if they wanted to get more information, and listed some of those initial meetings. We have online, and I know many of you have taken advantage of this and taken a look. We have an interactive copy of the zoning map. You can kind of zoom in and out, understand what the parcel is zoned today, what it's proposed to be, and some of the rationale why that change is being proposed. And we did a series of one-on-one meetings with property owners and occupants, the opportunity to set up time with staff to specifically discuss personal property and things, wanting to know how the changes might impact their personal property. Since then, over the last month, we have spent time reviewing all of those comments that we heard. Staff did some additional research and did reviews of the code as well. We took all of those comments, reviewed them, and have made changes to the draft document. We released that draft document about 2 weeks ago, and it's available online at imaginekalamazoo.com. Okay, so let's talk about what's in the code itself. Hi. Again, if you've been here before, this is still not new material. The zoning code table of contents is what is on the screen right now. Anything that's in blue is an existing section in Chapter 50, but that's receiving some edits. The 3 sections in green, landscape and screening, signage and lighting, are brand new sections to Chapter 50, meaning they existed in Appendix A. We brought them over, we ran them through that review process, and they're now going to be in Chapter 50. And so when you're looking at the code document, you'll notice that these sections are entirely in red, right? Red italic text, because they're new to Chapter 50. There are other ordinances that we are updating as part of this process, because we want to make sure all the ordinances are working together. So we are updating our nuisance chapter in our municipal code. This is things like noise and lighting and odor. The stuff that is in the zoning code right now that relates to nuisance issues is being moved to Chapter 21. We are updating the municipal code that deals with keeping of animals, specifically currently keeping backyard chickens or backyard rabbits is noted in the municipal code. We're moving it to the zoning code because it very specifically talks about things like setback of the coop or the hutch for the property lines, and that's a zoning code issue, not a municipal code issue. And then the last 2 municipal code items that are being updated through this process have to do with signs, specifically sign construction, and making sure that is talking correctly to the zoning code, and posting signs in public places, posting bills in public places are getting some updates. Those 4 updates will go directly to the City Commission when the rest of this goes to the City Commission. So we won't, the Plan Commission doesn't review those ordinances like they do with the zoning code. So those will pick up when we get to the City Commission stage of the review process. There is another ordinance that's going to be updated with this process, and that's the design review guidelines for downtown and Southtown areas. These are standards that we created in the starting in the mid-2000s and have updated a few times. These are a set of design guidelines for development in those areas. And so it talks about things like materials. It talks about some architectural details. And it talks about entrances and window placement and sign placement. Those things are all regulated in those last 3 things are all regulated in the zoning code. So what we have in these places are duplicate standards that kind of sit on top of each other. And so we are removing the design guidelines, and we will simply have our zoning code to regulate development in those areas. Okay, so let's talk about some things that have changed. I'm going to try and hit the highlights, especially things that we heard from the community. I am happy to dive in deeper if you have questions, either now or separately, as you go through the code to understand if something changed and why. So in general requirements, which is the first section of the zoning code, these are things like listing the zoning districts, setting out basic, how to use this code kind of standards. There are 2 things I want to highlight. First, we updated some of our definitions. I talked that the master plan really wants us to think about land use and transportation together. And so since we've been updating this code, we often use the street type as one of our tools for regulating where uses could go or how tall they could be, what their intensity is. And so we had a comment that the definitions didn't necessarily feel perfectly clear, so we did some additional work to make some of those definitions more differentiated between the street types and to be more clear. the whole definition section, for those of you that have been updating the code, had all wonky numbers because we kept adding new definitions as we brought in new sections to the zoning code. And so we have updated the number system for that. At the beginning of the code, we have a section called how to use this code, right? And it talked, in the past, it's talked about, I know this is small, yeah, but it is available to kind of look at online. In the past, this how-to section, which technically isn't code related, right? It's just kind of a user guide that we put at the front of the document. Tried to help folks along to say, what do you need to look at first? What standards are most important as you start to figure out how you can use your property? And so we, had things like check out your zoning district, and then check out, your uses, and are you part of a form-based district or a non-form-based district, because that will tell you what kind of standards you need to follow. And so we created this little roadmap. One of the things that we added, because we have found that this comes up a lot in site plan, or when people are coming to us to talk about developments, is are you in a overlay district? Specifically, are you in the NFP Overlay district? Because that's something you need to know at the beginning of your exploration for your property. And so we added very specifically that to this page of what you need to be thinking about at the start of a project, and called that out on this page. So we have made this talk about maps, zoning districts and maps. We didn't make any changes to the districts that are being proposed in terms of their definitions at this time, but we did make some map changes since we originally put forth the map. All of you know, I believe, that in April, we updated the properties at the corner of Drake and Stadium to be removed from the zoning process. So they are not being considered for change as part of this process. There were several other properties that we had conversations with, either in one-on-ones or in meetings, where properties, there were questions or concerns about what a property was being zoned and could we consider a different district. And so some of these include 2130 Parkview, which is the property across, well, it's Oakwood Neighborhood Association owns the property. It goes down to the lake. It's a property that's currently split zoned, meaning it has two designations on it, which we definitely don't want. Everything should have a single set of standards on it. Had both commercial and residential on it. And we heard from the community they did not want it to be residential. So it's been made, we heard from the community they did not want it commercial. We made it residential. I don't know if I said it wrong the first time, but in my head it sounded wrong. 904 Hotop, which is off Riverview Drive in the East Side neighborhood, had been left off the map, even though it's currently mapped with districts that are being changed by the zoning code, so we needed to make sure that we incorporated that. And there were properties on Lovell Street, close to Stadium Drive, where we pulled the proposed Live Work 1 zoning further to the east, down the street, after conversations about that area. Uses. We heard pretty resoundingly a concern about changing a car wash from being a special use to not being a special use in the community commercial district. So we have updated the code so that will remain a special use as it is today in community commercial, as well as the other districts that it existed in. It was already a special use, or it had remained a special use in all the other districts, but we added it back to the community commercial district. We also tried to add some clarity to the use table. So in our use table, we allow uses by right, and they get a P in the table. We allow uses with a special use permit, which means you have to go to the Plan Commission in order to activate that use on a location. And then we have a lot of uses that we list as PD, or permitted with development standards. In some cases, when you actually go to that use and you read through it, depending on the intensity of the use or what they were doing, it wasn't just that it was permitted with development standards, but it also required a special use, depending on some details. And so we tried to pull that information out and make sure it was present in the table, so it would be clear when you're looking at the table that depending on how you're using it, it could be a special use or it could be permitted with development standards, just to add some clarity to to folks using the table. We also added some additional restrictions to many uses to make sure that when commercial property turns the corner from a commercial street over to residential, that we're not allowing intense uses that are most appropriate for our commercial corridor down the street. And so we used our street type standards to make sure that to limit the more intense uses from those streets, so we weren't having a mismatch of, again, commercial development in places where it wasn't quite appropriate. And that came out of a couple conversations in different neighborhoods where in the past we had used commercial districts and pulled them down the street, but they were kind of narrowly focused commercial districts that just allowed a handful of uses. Those are being removed from the zoning code at this time, and so this is another way of regulating it to the same aims. I'm going to go, I'm going to save questions to the end, if that's okay. I was going to go to the very end, just so I can get through it all. And then I have a microphone for you and everything, so everyone can hear the question. Thank you. NFP. We received a lot of comments on the natural features protection overlay standards that related to things like lot coverage, the intent statement, wellhead protection standards and how those were changing or not changing. And I want to talk, I don't know if you all had the opportunity to attend the Natural Features Protection Review Board meetings last month and this month, but they did discuss these. If you did not get a chance, those meetings were recorded, and so you can catch up and review them online. The board discussed, had the benefit of receiving your comments from staff and anyone who attended as well. And they reviewed the language and discussed how to adjust it. So I'm going to read this to you because I know this is an important element of this. So the first one is the intent language for the NFP overlay ordinance. So we had originally adjusted it to include text that talked about development right in the first sentence. We have since adjusted it to read the following. The intent of the NFP overlay district is as follows. 1, to protect natural features in the city of Kalamazoo, specifically wetlands, water resources, trees, woodlands, floodplains, slopes, natural heritage areas, and habitat corridors. Those are the 7 defined natural features in the ordinance. 2, to guide site development, balancing growth and redevelopment with the protection of our existing natural features. And 3, to create site designs that are responsive to the existing natural features and minimize the impacts to the extent possible. And so that is the adjusted language that we're putting forth at this time that was reviewed by the NFP review board to their satisfaction. The second area that's getting some change is lot coverage requirements. And so if you recall, every zoning district has lot coverage requirements. And that means that's the amount of pavement or building rooftop that you can put on a lot, right? It's a ratio between what is impervious and what is pervious, essentially, or what is open, left open. It could be semi-impervious. All zoning districts have that. The NFP overlay is an overlay district that sits on top of lots that all have those standards on it based on whatever that district is. And so it set forth some additional guidance on how you manage those requirements. And so we originally, in the first draft, had removed that language from the proposed update. We have since put back the following, so it's going to read, lot coverage areas designated to meet the lot coverage requirements of the base zoning district, again, that base zoning, commercial, residential, manufacturing, should be located as follows. So A, contiguous. Areas required to be left as pervious or open shall be located in one contiguous area or clustered into areas that each equal at least 20% of the total pervious area. This is something that mostly was something that from the original code. We added a little bit of language at the beginning to clarify What this is saying is that when you have a site that has NFP overlay on it, and you've noted your features, and you've figured out what you need to do to keep development away from those features, when you are then trying to figure out how to lay out to meet your lot coverage requirements, to lay out the open space areas, this is meant to guide you. So we'd like you to try and keep them in one big area if you're an NFP, or at least in as big of chunks as you can based on the site. The second one has to do with the location. So adjacent to natural features. These areas, pervious areas, shall be located adjacent to the existing natural feature on the site. So we're asking that you add that space to what is already marked off as a natural feature, to add another layer of protection around those properties, to pull development back from that area. We also added some new language that has to do with what happens if the code is violated. This language talks about if a notice letter has been sent, right, to someone for violating the code, and they need to remedy this situation, we are asking that that remedy be reviewed by the Natural Features Protection Review Board, in the same way that we ask site plans to be reviewed by the Natural Features Protection Review Board, because that board has a level of expertise as it relates to planting or hydrology or other things that will be beneficial in reviewing what the remedy is for that violation, to make sure that we're getting it right. Parking. Parking did not see a lot of changes, but I did want to highlight, we've been exploring whether we were going to have a minimum parking requirement, which says thou shall provide at least X amount of parking for your project, and moving that to a maximum amount of parking, which says, you may provide anything up to this amount of parking. And we have moved to that model of maximum. And some of the rationale behind that is, in general, we see projects typically have too much surface parking. There's a lot of impervious surface that goes along with that. This is, we think, a better way to handle it. We always had a maximum requirement for our parking standards, but we had a minimum and a maximum, and you kind of had to thread the needle and get in between. We've just removed the minimum. And we reviewed our parking table and made a couple of tweaks to just make sure that we were comfortable with that change. This is something that cities across Michigan and the country are moving to as a model. So we'll continue to monitor that as projects come through to see if it has the intended impact of more appropriate scaled or size parking. The landscape and screening section, we had the opportunity to work with some landscape architects to review this section. How did it read? How could it be used and applied to make sure that it was functioning the way we wanted it to? This is one of those sections from the 2005 code in Appendix A that hadn't been updated in a while. And so we wanted to make sure that we were updating the language in a way that made it clear and made it compliant. There have been some court decisions related to landscaping and as well as signs that we want to make sure that we are complying with as well. And so we had a review done and made edits accordingly. We added some illustrations. There's still a couple more that we need to add in. And we adjusted the requirements for fences and landscaping when they're right by a driveway, or if you have a corner lot right at the corner. It's pretty common for codes to have what's called a site distance requirement, and so you pull at the corner, you pull the taller fence or the taller landscaping down to make sure that you aren't creating sightline issues for cars moving or backing out of driveways. And so we've added that to the code because it's something that we didn't have and is a pretty common requirement for safety reasons. The last two sections, which I did not have on here, are signage and lighting, which did not see significant changes from the previous draft. So let's talk a little bit about timeline, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So everything on, March through June, right, that's where we've been, right? Those are the meetings that we've had. We're in June. We've released the second draft. It's available online. We would like to have comments by the end of the first week of July. We will be happy to take comments after that, but we were trying to, get them so we would have the opportunity to update the code and get out another draft. We plan to do an informational presentation of everything to the Plan Commission in August, again, catching them up and preparing them for what would be the more formal review process. It's an opportunity to ask any last questions, for additional community comment. If there's anything else that needs to be edited, we can do that in the week after that meeting as we prepare for the public hearing, which at this point we're expecting to occur in front of the Plan Commission at their September meeting, which I think is September 6th. I'll tell you right. I'll look it up. It's the week of Labor Day, the first Thursday. It is the 7th, September 7th, is what we're estimating right now. The Plan Commission is not the final stop for any zoning code review. They make a recommendation. The City Commission takes that recommendation, positive or negative, and makes their own decision, which is the final decision. They do it over 2 meetings. They open up, they announce that they have this ordinance change in front of them, and they set the date of the public hearing. That's typically what happens at the first meeting. And the second meeting is where they would do a public hearing, just like at Plan Commission, take comment, do deliberations, and choose to vote or not. So that's kind of the process what we expect to be the process moving from here out, which gives us a little more time to continue dialogue and make any final adjustments and have it out there for review. So that is the extent of my presentation, and we have a microphone. We'll start to take comments in just a second. I just want to say that if you've not had a chance to review the draft code, you can go to imaginekalamazoo.com. It's on the projects page, and it's the second or third project. It says zoning code updates, and on that page are past presentations. If you're just kind of tuning into this project, then you can get caught up that way. The old copy of the draft, the new copy of the draft, updated map, and some additional information can all be found there. For those that are watching from home, we're going to open it up for questions and comments, and we have a microphone so everyone at home should be able to hear what everyone in the room is saying. After we've had comments in the room, we're going to open it up to see if anybody is calling in for comments, just to give anyone an opportunity from home who would like to do that. And that number is that might have been my computer, 888-382-9556. So again, if you're from home and you want to call in, 888-382-9556. It'll be a little while before we do the phone because we're going to do comments in person first, but you can queue up or you can wait a few minutes and then call in. So this gentleman back here, and I'm sorry I don't remember your name, but
Hello. Is this comments or like Q&A?
Either.
Okay.
You do what you want to do.
I've got a number of questions.
Yes. And if I can't answer them,
Sure.
I will get you an answer.
Okay. My name's Tom. In terms of, you mentioned a change to commercial zoning with regard to neighboring districts that conflict with usage, I guess, and I was wondering if there's an opportunity to...
Tom, is that microphone up all the way? Maybe you just
sorry.
need to hold it a
Sorry.
little closer?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
there we go. I heard it for a second.
Can we do the same thing with industrial zones, manufacturing, like GPI is an instance right now?
Oh, the street types?
Street types,
Yeah.
zoning types. I know there's no language currently in the manufacturing zoning language that says residential neighborhoods shouldn't be near manufacturing.
Right. We have not updated the manufacturing districts yet, right? Those still exist in the 2005 standards. Throughout all of this update process, we have used street types to help regulate intensity of uses. And so I would expect that to continue as we review manufacturing and residential, because
Okay.
those are the two main chunks that we have. So we'll review and understand what that looks like, look at the street type map. But that is, again, we have committed to think about land use and transportation together. So I would expect that we would continue to use street type to regulate uses in those districts and any other districts that we create between now and the end of the update process?
Well, I would maybe encourage you to use weather and wind patterns in conjunction with street types, because as we see, wind determines toxic air fallout quite a bit, so it has really nothing to do with street type. If you're half a mile away and still breathing in the same toxic air, that has nothing to do with the street type guidelines. Another question you mentioned, maybe you had the opportunity to attend one of the NFP board meetings. I went to one of the committee meetings last time where they were planning, staff member was trying to convince them that the old storage of loose materials guideline was kind of obsolete. Sorry.
It's okay, just
I feel
keep
like
it close. I'm
I feel
sorry.
like it's really close.
Yeah, really close. Yeah.
So they were saying that that's obsolete and that it's not really with the current science standards. But then I immediately asked what constitutes loose materials, and they didn't know.
Sure.
So I was like, if we don't know what they are by definition, and you're confidently
Yep.
trying to educate the NFP board that we don't need them, then maybe we should keep them until we do know what they are.
Sure. We do talk in the zoning code about loose materials. It's not in the definition section, it's in the use section, because we talk about outdoor storage. And we talk about the outdoor storage of loose materials, and we give a sample list of what will be included in those loose materials.
Is there a prohibited list by any chance?
There is not. There's just
Okay.
a list of what would likely be what likely constitutes loose materials for outdoor storage, and then goes on to regulate, how high the walls around it would be. Does it need to be indoor? Those kind of things.
So if you're going to maybe get rid of the distance requirement, maybe a prohibited list would be useful with broad terms like poisonous, toxic, et cetera. That may be helpful for broad regulation. On pages 114 through 115, it has to do with the, shoot, I left my notes at home.
It's okay. I'm looking it
up. It's basically the deposit for site
Bonding of projects?
bonding of projects. Yes.
This is in the NFP ordinance, and this is talking about requiring certain projects to put forth a bond
Correct.
to ensure that through their site development, if damage is caused, that there are funds for remedy.
Right. So I noticed that that deposit, that bond, would be returned to the developer or parcel owner once the occupancy has been
Right,
established.
once construction is done and they've gotten their occupancy
Yeah.
permit.
However, I didn't see anything that's dictated whether or not. I feel like there should be something in there that says, okay, we've determined that there are violations here. You don't get that bonding back until the violations are, because it looks like you can just get that occupancy certification or very easily without any real accountability of how you use the land. And that spills right over into the next section, M, violations. And I'm confused why there's no, maybe this is described somewhere else, but there's no language that says whether or not who's responsible for identifying violations. I mean, in my mind, there would be language that would say the NFP board was consulted and they've created a document with critical natural features worth protecting, and that document then will then be compared against the final result of development. And if only then can we have a comparison of a before and after. Otherwise, I don't see any language that says, like, are we just hoping independent activists, watchdogs, kind of are going to hold these parcel owners accountable? Who's going to be citing the violations? So there's just no clear language.
Sure.
So I'm hoping that the bonding can only be returned once violations aren't found to be true, and that violations can only be found if we have some kind of document to to reference from
Sure.
from before development took place.
So I can provide your comment about clarity in the bonding. I appreciate as it relates to violations. So the NFP overlay exists in the zoning code. So like other zoning standards, we go out regularly throughout the development process after the approved site plan is done. NFP board reviews the site plan and follows along and checks things off as they go. And, early on, it's things like, is the construction fencing in the right place? And then as it moves through, it's okay, now that there's buildings, do they match the site plan? Are they too close to the features? Whatever the element is that they're reviewing for, staff goes out and reviews regularly using that site plan document. I appreciate your comment about the NFP board actively being involved in that process. I just wanted to tell you how it's done today.
So that language is in a different document that I don't, is that what you're saying?
No.
Or some kind of regulatory language is
it's
present?
how we manage our site plan process. And when we close out a site plan and a project is done and it's, asking for its certificate of occupancy, we go out and inspect it to make sure that it was not only developed per the building code, right? The building officials look at that, but planning and zoning go out and make sure that it is compliant with everything planning and zoning related in the site plan.
Okay, so there is somebody that is, I guess, beholden to the natural features part of it. It's not just it's
Correct.
not going to be rubber stamped. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Yeah, they look to make sure everything is in compliance. If it's not compliance, then they can't get their certificate of occupancy, and
Okay.
they'll need to make changes in order or complete the plan if it's things that were left off in order to get there.
So sorry to harp on this, but so
No, it's okay.
that language is in no way necessary to have in the 155-page document that I'm referring to. That would just be redundant, or?
It's part. Bobby, is it in our site plan? Where do we house that? I think it's just part of normal procedure, right? I mean, you just.
I guess I'm still a little bit confused about Chapter 50. What's the 155-page document that I'm referring to?
Chapter 50 is what you're looking
yeah,
at,
that's
right?
That's what I'm referring
yeah.
to. There seems to be really. Okay.
We just haven't moved it over yet. Sure.
Okay.
And just I'm going to repeat that so everyone could hear. The administrative section, which talks about administering the code, plan commission review, enforcement, is housed in Appendix A still. So remember, we're kind of operating with two zoning codes. One is getting smaller while the other one gets bigger, and soon the one will be gone. Both are fully active and applicable based on what rules they have in them, right? What they apply to. That is where the enforcement of violation language exists. However, we have staff that this is their role to go out and make sure that things are compliant with the zoning code and the zoning standards and the site plan. And that is a required step for that review to occur before certificate of occupancies, which is kind of that last stop, right? That's kind of the last thing we hold on to make sure that a site was developed in the way that the site plan or the building code was approved to.
Okay, and maybe I'll look at that a little bit more closely then. A random thought then is maybe not have firm dollar amounts attached to the violations, but maybe percentages of annual operating cost of the business, if that's the case, because $1,500 or $2,500 fee is, companies will happily pay that to not deal with resolving any violation. So, but if it's a percentage, maybe they'll be more willing. The lighting thing has been brought up a number of times. It's not something that was on my radar at all until somebody else brought it up at the Kalamazoo College meeting.
Right.
But it was a good point about nighttime lighting standards being more science-based. I'm looking at Ann Arbor Ordinances because it's one of the closest, more progressive cities, and they've got a very science-based standard that's aligned with natural light time science standards. Sorry if I repeated that. And that I was hoping to see nice red language to reflect that, because I've brought that up to a number of times. 3,000 degree lighting temperature at night being one of the most, I guess, relevant examples of that, but that still hasn't been.
Right.
And Ann Arbor does have 3,000 degrees as their nighttime lighting standards, so I'd encourage city planning to look at that at their most recent ordinance, which has a really nice set of graphics and very easy to read. But 3,000 degrees seems really important. Similar with signage. I didn't see any language that Ann Arbor's also got a really nice prohibited signage section. Things like flashing, strobing signs is included in theirs. We don't seem to have that.
We don't have a section about it, but we do talk about where those things are permitted and how. And it depends on, it's based on the area. So some of that is in there, it's just not one full section.
Okay, well, I would encourage city planning to consider that we have a lot of, in my opinion, obnoxious and potentially dangerous strobing, flashing, bright signage in this town. It's basically whole entire storefronts lit up blinking at night, which conflicts with other nighttime outdoor lighting standards.
So just so you know, Tom, on page 135, we do have a prohibited types of illumination. So it's not of signs, but it's one way that is handled, and there's a couple of other notes. The following types of illumination are prohibited: beacon and strobe lights, colored lights that could be confused with or construed as traffic control devices, and lights that create hazards for those traveling in the right-of-way.
Is this new language or existing language?
This is language that existed in Appendix A that we are pulling over.
Okay, so we have businesses that might be in violation
Out of
of that
compliance.
all over the place. A lot of tobacco stores, for instance, have bright green flashing lights all over town, and some giant LED screens that are also maybe in violation. And the last question I had was parking. I was a little confused about this, and you described this in detail, and I was still confused, but I think I sort of understood it. But I was wondering if percentage of the lot, I mean, you just said like impervious pavement is a problem that you want to address, but then I don't see any firm language that describes how you would prevent that from happening. So would is it number of cars currently, or percentage of the parcel can be impervious lot? And you've got number of maximum vehicles?
Sure.
Or?
So the lot coverage requiremements, the ratio of impervious to pervious, is listed under each zoning, is listed in the zoning standards. And each, whether it's a lot type in the form-based code or in the non-form-based code section, it's by district, it has a maximum percentage that can be covered. Now, we set that standard, and then we allow the property owner to decide, how they use their lot, right? Is it driveway, no driveway? Is it, two-story house, one-story ranch house, right? Or, bigger footprint that way, and give the kind of the freedom or flexibility to kind of figure out how you adhere to those standards on your specific lot. Kalamazoo does not. We don't have a lot of super common lot sizes, right? I mean, if you look at the plat map around the city, we have lots that are 33 feet wide all the way up to, 100, right? And sometimes bigger in our residential areas and elsewhere. So we set the percentage, and then we look at these other parameters. For parking, specifically, because you're asking about the parking section, one of the reasons why we're looking at moving away from a minimum is thinking about the quantity of surface parking that we have. And so yes, those two things are tied, right? That's why one of the reasons why we're removing that minimum standard, and why we're also setting a maximum, right? So we're letting you have control based on street parking, shared parking, all those things. You can kind of figure it out for your site and follow all the zoning standards, but we're not going to let you go unlimited, right? We do want to set a maximum, and we set that maximum based on the context of the location, right? So places that don't have on-street parking, that are kind of big auto-oriented areas where you'd expect people to drive to, have a higher overage than walkable or more urban areas.
Are existing businesses grandfathered with regard to that maximum? I'm thinking of like the Wayside parking lot, which is
Sure.
2 football fields for 10 years now
So when that site gets redeveloped,
yeah,
things have to start to come into compliance depending on how much they're changing, right? If they're doing a full site redevelopment of the site, then everything needs to be brought up. If they're just doing little tweaks, they may not have to bring up everything to compliance. But you hit on an important point, is that anything that was done legally before this code is approved is allowed to continue.
okay.
And that's, that's the understanding that it would be very difficult to flip a switch, right, and make things no longer allowed. It's unrealistic, whether you're a residential property or a commercial property. So things are allowed to continue until they get redeveloped, or until you're updating your sign, for example, or redoing just the front of your building. Maybe it's not a full redevelopment. Things start to be required to bring you into compliance.
All right, thank you. And thanks for the change to the parcels next to Asylum. A lot of people in the community really didn't want that. Thanks for listening to that. And the special use permit, thanks for changing that as well.
Thank you for your questions, Tom, and comments.
Hi, my name is Gabrielle. I'm an environmental educator in the area.
Thank you. Make sure, please hold it
Sorry.
as I'm sorry.
Can you hear
it's
me?
just the way that one
Okay.
functions. Yep.
It's an odd mic. It's very directional. But my name is Gabrielle. I'm an environmental educator and online teacher about mycology in the area. And this is more a comment than a question, but I just wanted to talk a little bit on behalf of the Asylum Lake Preserve. For those of you who haven't spent a lot of time there, it is our largest green area in Kalamazoo. And very specific here, it is a preserve, not a park. And pardon me? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a beautiful place. I spend a lot of time there. And so when you're working with a preserve, we're preserving specific things in preserves. We're preserving biodiversity, specific populations of animals, flora, fauna, fungi. So it's very important to consider the ecological ramifications of not just what's directly in the area, but also what's in the surrounding area. Kalamazoo should know more about water pollution than a lot of places. Considering what we've dealt with in the Kalamazoo River. I live right down the road, and at least 2 of the 3 walkable parks from me are now cut off from access because of water and soil pollution issues. Inserting high pollution commercial activity like this car wash that's been proposed will potentially introduce that pollution into the fragile and valuable wetland and water system, putting all of those organisms at risk. And just a few things that I have seen this year alone in Asylum Lake that I think are worth mention. We have a really thriving population of Typholatifolia, which is a type of endangered cattail. I have seen sandhill cranes, beavers, trumpeter swans, orchids, which are very ecologically fragile, butterflies, including threatened pollinator species like monarchs. We have thriving populations of native trees, including American plum, which I have not seen anywhere else within the area of Kalamazoo. We have thriving populations of fungi and lichens. We have spring ephemeral species like ramps, Virginia bluebell, trillium, false mermaid weed. We have angelico. We have one of the only populations of cow parsnip that I know within the city that has not been sprayed because people think it's giant hogweed. I just wanted to point out that this area is valuable for what it provides to the native wildlife, and also for our ability to observe things within that ecosystem. So I'm not necessarily against zoning some of this for commercial use, but I think that we should be cautious about what kind of commercial use is done in that area, because something like a car wash that introduces a lot of pollution. I think there are potentially better things that could be done if we want commercial use in that area. Thank you.
Thank you. You should probably just hand it down. We'll go over.
Hi. I'm confused about the differences between open spaces and green spaces.
As it relates to impervious coverage?
In natural features, or the reason why most of us are attending. When I look at open spaces, I think of some of the city parks that we have, which are fine and dandy. But in this day and age, we're going to have to eliminate more and more grass and put in more plants to be able to sustain our own health, more or less the animal health. So I'm really confused about what you consider open spaces versus green spaces versus privately owned green spaces, such as the two preserves, Kleinstock and Asylum, and also Woods Lake. The Oakwood neighborhood has used that for a long, long time. They have no sense of needing to sell it nor wanting to sell it, and yet we're rezoning that and not declaring it as a green space for zoning. I think we're going about the zoning backwards in this day and age, because we need to protect those green spaces first and then determine the other spaces around them. You yourself said just a minute ago, neighborhoods are zoned specifically and protected so that a 5-lane highway can't go by them. Green spaces are the same thing. We see this all around us. The smoke that's out here right now, we need to really step up. Kalamazoo did a great job with the NFP, but it's softening the language already. And that is a major concern for many of us. You don't put a liquor store near a school. You don't put adult sex stores near a school. You don't put high development near green spaces or preserves. And I know that we've just kicked the car wash down the road. It's coming back, and we know that, unless we start to listen to the people. And the people continue to say, zone it green, find some kind of zoning ritual, and do it now. Because if you rezone Oakwood at this point in time, the property near Oakwood, what you've already done is put into process that it's easy to make it residential. And that's, anything we know about the mindset means that once we put something in motion, it continues to snowball and move forward. So what you're doing right now is putting into motion more development and more lack of actual green space that is natural. And those are my biggest concerns. And it's not the first time I've said it. So when are we going to get a zoning for green spaces before we put zoning on residential areas or commercial areas?
Sure. So let me answer your first question first. When we talk about lot coverage, we're talking about whether it is impervious or pervious. I interchangeably used open, green for talking about those pervious areas. And so the lot coverage in NFP probably does the same thing, right? We're talking about areas that could be a variety of different, it could be turf lawn all the way to a native plant garden. It's the point is that it's impervious. And so when I use those, and I'm talking about lot coverage, I'm definitely interchanging those. I do really try to be clear when I'm talking about a preserve. And so in several places in the code, we talk about when things are located next to an open space, park, or preserve. And, just to be clear, we say all of those because people have different connotations about, what's a park. Park could be hardscape or green space. So we try to talk about it in all of those ways and try to call out a preserve very specifically. So that's for the first question. In Appendix A, we have a district that's called the Public District. It has never been used in the city, and it is defined for public properties, which include parks. That is the closest thing that we currently have to what you're describing as a no development district. Actually, let me take that back, because it's not no development, it's public stuff. So it could be a public government building and those kind of things, but it could also be parks, areas of no development. As I had said when we talked about last, we are nearing the end of this review, right, of Appendix A, and we'll be reviewing over the next year all of those districts to figure out how they should transform or be used. And I'll say this, because I've said it again, I said it in the past, we could have a district that we put on, we could in theory have a district that we put on parks, right, or open spaces, or preserves. We wouldn't put it on somebody's property that isn't asking for it, because we would be taking away their development rights, and we aren't legally allowed to do that. So we could have a district that could be requested, in theory, to be put on there. So for example, Oakwood Beach, we could look at something, for that purpose. But I think what we'll, when we do our next set of code updates, which we'll roll into as soon as, actually even before this is approved, right? We'll start to be reviewing things and getting it out for public review. We'll be reviewing the P district to understand, why it was created back in 2005, what were they intending it to be used for, does it need to be changed to something else, and what would that look like?
Well, then I request that you take the Oakwood Neighborhood Association Park off the list for now, and that it's removed just as Asylum was removed.
Sure. So it is currently split zoned CN1, which is commercial.
Both of those could be removed right now.
And that district is going away. So it's going to need to be zoned something, right? In the same way that the
it's zoned park community use.
Right,
We
which is a
need to
district
do that now.
right, which we don't have,
But we
right,
need to do
we
it
could
now.
create, yeah.
Can I ask one other question?
Yes, please.
What is designated in all of the little pocket parts, particularly in Winchell? What are those zoned as?
What are they zoned as? Right now, they are all zoned residential. So if you look at the zoning map, that whole area is zoned residential. You'll go and look at parks across the city. Parks are allowed in almost every district. I think they are allowed in every district. So they, like schools, often are whatever the surrounding zoning district is.
All right, we need to change that, and we need to do it now. Please take Oakwood's property off the list for now and retain it even without any listing. Oakwood neighborhood is not going to be upset about that.
Right. Everything has to be zoned something, unless it's a public right-of-way.
That's what we believe,
So,
because that's
yeah.
what we've been taught, but we can change that now. We can change it today. It really is. We changed the natural feature protection. Why can't we change this?
Sure. Yeah. So the question is, what would a district look like? We don't have one that exists on the books right now. I have seen other cities who have created a park district, and it seems to be very specifically, the ones I've seen in the past, I haven't explored it recently, are very specific to what types of parks they allow in the different parks districts. So thinking about a regional, very large Upjohn Park kind of park, which has some intensity of development, versus a park that is a pocket park in a neighborhood that might just be a square green space. And so they use that to support different scales of parks, is what I have seen in the past. As I had said, I am happy to explore that option when we do our next round to kind of figure out, does it make sense to have that kind of district? How would we use it and where would we use it? Thank you. Sure. Hold on. I'll get you the microphone in just a second. Go ahead. Yeah, you've had it a couple times in your hand. Go ahead. Ask your question. Just keep it.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? I can get pretty loud without it. So
We just want to make sure that it's picked up on the
first, I want to
stream.
say, I don't know who Tina McClinton is, but thank you for telling me where you're at, because I was late because I was in the wrong place. Next, I don't know if you guys have covered it, but the little white things for the bike lanes, they're the wrong color. We live in Kalamazoo and we have 9 months of white. They're the wrong color. They're disappearing because cars are hitting them because we live in a state, in a city where we have 9 months of white. They're getting built up with snow and they're getting smashed in the snow. Change the color. Color them purple, color them something, just not white. My son and I thought chartreuse was a great color for him because it's not going to match anything. Just something not white. Beyond that, I also raised 2 very environmentally conscious children. One was going to be marine mammal specialist. The other wanted to be a rehab specialist of ecologically friendly and animal friendly conscious person. So this whole changing the green spaces, I'm there. I have 30 plus years in educating children, not just my own, but National Geographic is stuck in my head. The idea of over here across from DHS, that's a bad idea. Do not disappear that little bit of wetland. Those trees need to stay put. I worked at Bronson for 14 years, and I can't tell you how many times we ran out of parking where they now have a culinary building for KVCC because that parking lot was flooded, and that's where I was supposed to park when I worked in the kitchen. It got flooded all the time, and we had to figure out where to park. And it's because that waterway that goes through there is part of that spot that you guys are looking at trying to disappear. Don't disappear it. Build where the DHS building is at. It's got 2 buildings over there, 3 buildings sitting over there, and a big empty parking lot sitting there doing nothing. Tear them down, build there. It makes more sense. Use what's already there. I was going to be an architect. That's what I wanted to do. Rip out the old, and as you say, rezone what's already there. Keep the green green. Let the trees do their job. At the beaches, they're making sure they plant grasses, cattails around the wetlands, the things that are going to help keep the natural habitat from eroding away. And that's what those trees and that grassland that is in there is doing. By taking that wetland and that little bit of green that's in there away, you're causing problems. All the animals that are living there are going to disappear. You're, like she's talking about, the few little animals. If any of us hit a goose, we will get a ticket. It's a law in Michigan. It is a law. It literally, you literally get a ticket. A duck, you're fine. You hit a goose, you get a ticket. Please, keep the green green. I'm 100% with you. Every one of the green spaces, keep them green. Don't change them. The deer that we have in this town need to stay. I can't stress it enough.
Thank you. I think, Bob, if you can get back to Iris and then back up. Hold on, Tina. Okay, I'm going to go back, then forward, and then back again. So sorry. Trying to go by when people raise their hands.
Hi, my name is Tina. I live right next to the green space that the city of Kalamazoo is trying to destroy. It's a wetland. It's wetlands. It has its own natural watershed, has lots of deer, lots of animals, and a ground that will absorb water. In the NFP, they just changed it to where they can take away 8 to 10 24-inch trees to build apartments in a floodplain area. This is in the Portage Creek floodplain map. It's right in the map. This green space saves our home. We flood all the time in this neighborhood, all the time. And by the way, like she said, the deer, we love the deer. We love the animals. They have to have a home too. And when you take this, if you do anything to this little green space, you will cause more flooding. You will cause more water to go in our backyards. When you have the empty DHS building, 322 Stockbridge, that the city of Kalamazoo owns, big old parking lot, you could build there and leave this natural space with 100 trees that is in the NFP that saves our homes from flooding. Now that you have all these bike lanes in the street, when we flood, traffic is backed up so bad. From work, it should take me 7 minutes to get home. It takes me 25 minutes to get home because you're blocked in traffic, because people are trying to get in the neighborhood, out of the neighborhood. Where I live, I'm completely trapped. Now, KBCC growing field, you can walk right across that property. You can walk across my street. You just can't drive out the neighborhood. And now you want to destroy this green space. And you've changed the NFP so you can destroy those trees. There's 100 trees in that wooded area. It's a nice little green space. It's our little piece of country in the city. And me and all my neighbors, we love it and we need it to survive. And so does the animals. Thank you.
Thanks, Tina.
Thanks,
Over and then
Tina.
come
And I
back
think
up.
a lot of
Woman behind
us
you.
here strongly support what you're talking about because it is in a floodplain. It's a beautiful area, and a lot of times the inner neighborhoods get overlooked for their requests. So I really think that we ought to listen to that, and also in Oakwood. Christina, first, can you tell me what the next round is? Because I'm not sure what that is.
I meant that we've been slowly updating the zoning code over the last couple years. We hope in the next year to finish that process. We still have quite a bit to do. We have residential, and we have manufacturing, and we have our administrative enforcement process are kind of the big sections left to do, and then there are several other smaller pieces. When I mean the next round is not what is in the proposed draft right now, in the next process. And we'll probably be starting, we'll be starting right away. We've been doing background research already to understand what is existing in manufacturing, what does it look like, where is it mapped, and we are doing the same process for residential to understand our different districts, where they're mapped, how they're used, do they match the standards, the lot sizes, just to kind of prepare ourselves for that conversation.
And the residential will be the next one that you do?
I think so.
Okay.
We might, maybe it's residential and manufacturing at the same time. I haven't quite gotten there yet. I just know that those are the pieces that we have left, and we'll come up with a plan for how we bring those forward. I don't know that they make sense they both will garner a lot of conversation, and so I want to make sure to give each their some space. So I don't think they'll be together. I think we'll probably do them back to back, but I'm working on that still.
Okay. So I think we should be looking at new and innovative ways and other places who are doing these things. And definitely at that point, we definitely need to look at Wokewood. We definitely do. So the question, first it's comments. It's about the NFP definition and intent. I saw that before. I know that it was approved by the NFP, but it does not give us environmental protection. In fact, the language at the end is minimize impacts to the greatest extent possible. To me, it's really opening it up and still opening up, keeping it to development. The question has always been, why did it change from the original definition? That was because somebody wanted to include and invite development. And the new wording that is there definitely does invite that, and it says to minimize impacts to the greatest extent possible. And again, I know the NFP has approved it, the board has approved that, but again, if we're all upset about this, we really need to hit the public hearings. How do the new changes in the NFP prevent new variances or variances when developers come in and want new development? Because I've been at meetings where variances have been approved quite a lot, and I'd like to know, if we're tightening it up, how will it work? How does the new wording prevent it?
Sure. So we did not change the language associated with with each of the natural feature standards. So that is not being proposed for change at this time. So things like the distance that you need to be when you're putting your construction fencing and using the critical root zone around a tree, that standard, those are not being updated as part of this process.
I understand that, but the question is about variances. When they request them, I just know that variances are requested quite a lot, and I'm very concerned about the number of trees, because the issue was the number of trees that were allowed to be cut down. That was a variance from the NFP. So in redoing the NFP, it would seem that we would want to tighten that up. I know you've mentioned variances before, so I think it's huge.
Right. Anything in the zoning code, right? If it's in the zoning code, it legally is required to have a relief valve. That relief valve is a variance from the standards that exist. And that's because the zoning code is a kind of broad document that's meant to fit a lot of situations. And you write the standards the best that you can, but you have this relief valve with some specific standards that the state lays out for how to review those requests. So anything in the zoning code is, could be reviewed through the variance process.
Correct. Again, I'm also very concerned about when we get into residential and manufacturing and lighting, and I truly don't think that what we're doing with the NFP still is going to provide the environmental protection that we need. I think it's being diluted, and I think that this valve that you're talking about is pretty useful for developers. So thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to, Bobby, why don't you come up here? We've got two up here, and then over to John. Yes. Hold on. We'll get you the microphone. Green, and then Eric.
Hi, Melinda Scott. I'm one of those squeaky wheels that signed the letter about the car wash. And it seems to me, this is sort of a no-brainer to me. Has this been resolved? It seems pretty clear that water runs downhill, and anything that's along at Drake and Stadium that is potentially polluting or even has a large space of asphalt around it is not going to work in that location. What are you going to do about preserving Asylum Lake vis-a-vis the use of that property along Stadium at Drake? That's the first part of my thing. So do you want to address that, or shall I go on?
Sure.
Okay.
So those properties are currently zoned residential. they're zoned for a mix of medium density and low density residential, which means the property owner could choose to apply those standards for residential setbacks, buildings, lot size, all that kind of stuff, to develop that property by right if they are following the standards for the residential districts. They would also have to apply the NFP overlay standards. So it would be those two things would guide the development of the site.
Okay, so no more discussion about car washes on that corner. Is that what I'm hearing?
Not with this process.
Not with this
Right.
process.
The property owner has the right, in the same way that you have the right for any properties that you own, to make a request for zoning review.
For zoning review?
For a zoning change, right?
Okay.
That's, you are permitted to make that request.
All right,
So I
but right
can't
now,
say, okay.
but right now it's zoned
It's
residential,
zoned a mix
correct?
of a medium density residential and single family residential.
Okay, great. Okay, second question is, do you use topographic maps when you're considering your zoning, or are they only political maps?
Sure. So the topographical maps were used when establishing where the NFP Overlay District
Okay.
is located.
Okay.
So if you recall, we did NFP in two chunks, two phases. We did an initial phase that was based on the master plan and talked at high level about natural features, with the promise that we would come back and do more in-depth analysis. That was done. I believe it was approved in '21, and a lot of that type of data was used in order to locate where that overlay district should be placed, so it
Okay.
matches with features.
My concern is, if you look at the topographic map of Kalamazoo, I live in Parkview Hills, and we're very aware of the fact that there is a wildlife corridor that runs right through the city of Kalamazoo. It's not complete, but it's pretty darn good, and we see an awful lot of wildlife, including, I've seen coyotes and a lot of larger things that including Asylum Lake. It goes on all the way through town. And if those considerations and the floodplain issues, which I'm hearing people talking about, are those being considered in your zoning?
No. So the topographical map is used for the NFP overlay. It is not used because that has specific standards that talk about slope and sizes of slope that can and can't be developed or touched. So it is used there, that's zoning, but it is not used as it relates to mapping other districts.
All right, so what I'm hearing you say, if this is correct, is that all these concerns about floodplain and marshes and wildlife corridors and stuff don't really belong at the zoning commission. They belong at the NFP. Is that correct?
So the city uses, the zoning tool that the city uses to help impact environmental development, and you do not necessarily need to use the zoning code. There are other tools that exist out there. There's one tool that we use.
But, okay, so then it seems to me like you have a problem then with some of the things that I'm hearing people saying here, is that there are proposed developments that are going to go on, that are being proposed and not necessarily been approved yet, onto questionable pieces of land in terms of the environmental impact of
Sure.
that.
So if there are things with floodplains, those are reviewed at the state level. So when we get a project that has floodplain associated with it, there are reviews that are required at the state and federal level if you're making any changes. And Bobby here just recently switched from managing our site plan process, so he might be able to give you a little more information on that. But every project has a lot of layers associated with it, right? Depending on where it is and what characteristics it has. The zoning code has a lane, right? And it can cover X number of issues. And then there are floodplain standards, or there are brownfield requirements because the site's contaminated, or there's a supportive economic zone on the property that exists in some places that are put on it. And so any project will have a lot of different layers, and each one kind of handles their specific issues.
Okay.
The zoning code, we at the city have chosen to add the Natural Features Protection Overlay District as a tool that's in the zoning code. So right there, it's already a little bit limited, right? Because the zoning code is subject to the variance process. The zoning code is related specifically to land use. It has some limitations that just need to be recognized when you're using that tool. But we chose to add that into the code as one of the things
Okay.
that we do.
Yeah. Well, okay, so basically, though, you're dealing with the political map. is
I'm
what-
sorry?
You're dealing with the political map from your point of view, right? You're dealing with, you're not dealing with
I'm not sure
the
what you're referring to
topographic map.
specifically with
Oh, sorry.
with the political map. We
Poli-
used maps and of natural features when we created the map for the Natural Features Protection Overlay District.
Okay,
So they were used
right.
there.
all right. Thanks.
Oh, no, I'm going to have,
I just want to say
Oh.
thank you very much
Oh.
for holding the hearing and offering the community the opportunity to understand the process. Just a question in the room. Is anybody here a member of the city commission? Is anybody here? We don't have any city commissioners
I
here,
don't think
right, at
there's
the meeting?
any city commissioner
And
or
there's
plan
nobody
commission
here from
tonight.
the NFP board either?
Not tonight.
No, natural features. Yeah, there's nobody from the natural features board here as well. So, yeah, planning commission, city commission, or natural features percent. So ultimately, we're echoing these concerns through Christina, excuse me. But ultimately, all of our concerns need to lie with those individual boards. And if we really want to have an impact with that, where are those representatives of our community? I ask you. So
Yeah.
I thank you very much for your time. I appreciate the
Thanks.
opportunity to contribute.
You can go right here to Eric. And then John, you're next.
Hello, Christine.
Hi.
Two things for you. Can you hear me? Question on some clarification on the car wash special use. So I'm going to use Ashtimo as an example, and I know we're not Ashtimo, it's Kalamazoo. This is just an example. If you talk to any of the developers over in that area, Gizmondo, for example, they'll tell you that the way to get around most any zoning stipulation is with a PUD. That's your golden ticket. So, however, if they were to do a car wash, even in a PUD, they would still require special use in Ashtimo. Will that be the same in Kalamazoo?
Correct.
Okay. Good.
So for those in the audience, Eric is referring to, he called it a PUD. It's a planned unit development, which is something we have. It's a overlay. It's a district that we have, a special district, and what it allows is a kind of a creation through a long public process of standards that fit a specific site. It's usually done for very large projects. I think the last one that was done in the city was Arboretum Parkway. So 2012, 10, 9, when that first came forward. It's not, it's typically large projects, right, where you're dividing into lots, but you are correct. A car wash is a special use, is still a special use. And anything at PUD is still a very lengthy process that goes to Plan Commission and City Commission, so it would be reviewed as part of that.
Good deal. Second thing, the only other thing I had really, for the vacuums, it mentions some restrictions around residential zone properties. I've seen that in a couple of different townships that we've done some work in, and it backfired on at least one for sure. And a couple of the other ones that I've seen, instead of having it worded as a residentially zoned property, it's any property that's being used for a residential use.
Right, right. The challenge with that
Yeah.
is that the rationale for choosing a residential district versus just used residentially, You could have residential uses off Stadium Drive, as mixed use above or in the back of the property. It still makes that area appropriate for that use.
Agreed.
So that is why we chose to state it as residential zones. And it's not just residential zones, I'll read it. Outdoor vacuuming is not permitted on lots adjacent to an open space, park, or preserve as well. So,
I see. Okay.
as well as not permitted next to a lot that's residentially zoned.
Right. So I agree with the concept there, because that doesn't mean that it wouldn't still be okay. It would still be within the realm of what would make sense for that area. I agree with that. But so like if you had a property that wasn't zoned residential, but somebody developed it into apartment complex or whatever the case may be, you would now have outdoor vacuuming next to apartment complex, and you'd have all these very angry people that they wouldn't, the way that it's worded now, they may not get an opportunity to voice their displeasure
Sure.
and say something.
So our goal is to have a zoning map that is as right as possible, right?
Gotcha.
And so we have residential developments now that are zoned commercial, right? And we're
Yep.
rezoning many of them through this process to a residential category as part of that cleanup through our map. So while never probably quite perfect, given the number of parcels we have in the city, that is something that we're working to make sure that we have managed.
Okay, cool. Well, I appreciate everything you guys have done. I know that we all give these guys a really hard time about, are you actually listening to us? Are you listening? This, that. And, I think that this, for me anyway, I think this should prove that they are hearing us. Like, nobody's going to get everything that they ask for, like, welcome to adulthood, right? So, but I think that this shows that they are listening to us. So for that, I appreciate it.
Thanks. And then over here to John. Thanks, Bobby. Bye.
Can you hear me?
Just hold it in kind of more vertically.
Like this, is that better?
Yes.
My main question is what is the purpose and what is the intent of adding 2 and 3 to the intent of the NFP?
Sure. So the intent of changing, we'll start with the intent of changing the NFP, right? The purpose of changing the intent language of NFP was to clarify what NFP was at its root, right?
For who?
For the Natural Features Protection Review Board, for people who have natural features protection mapped on their property, for those that want to purchase property that has natural features protection on it. We want to make sure that it is clear for everybody what the intent of that district is. And, due to that, we wanted to make sure that we were being true to the language that we used when NFP was created, which was that NFP was always meant to balance.
Christine, if I look at the
Let
original...
me finish let me answer your question, John, and then you can, NFP was always intended to guide development in a more thoughtful way, right? It was never intended to say, it was never intended to say no development here. And we talked about that in every PowerPoint presentation that we gave for natural features protection, and we can go back and look at them all. It was never no development here. It was how you do development to keep those features in mind with the intent of protecting them and guiding development away from them.
I understand that. I've read it extensively. I have the original draft, so I've looked at it many, many times, and I'm kind of confused. And a perfect example is what happened on Oakland Drive with the Country Club. How that happened, how that was approved by the Natural Features Board is just completely mysterious to me, and I think a lot of other people. But when you're adding number 2 that says guide site development, balancing growth and redevelopment with the protection of our existing natural features, and then number 3, create site designs that are responsive to the existing natural features and minimize impacts to the extent possible. What does that mean to the natural feature.
Sure.
What does responsive mean?
So, NFP is in the zoning code, right? And so the zoning code lays out how a property is or is not used and developed. And so NFP is located on properties from residential, commercial to manufacturing. It is intended to make sure that when someone is designing their site at those early phases, thinking about their site plan, that they are taking those existing features into account and planning accordingly. And that's how the ordinance is set up. So there are standards that talk about distance from features. There are standards that talk about landscaping around features. We have construction details for when you do construction and how you fence things off. And so responsive is that, right? It is set up to say, here are the features, we're defining them. If you have them on your property, you need to do the following if you are developing your property.
I understand that, but even if you look at the original draft and what was originally proposed, just for tree replacement, and if you look at how those changes that have been made within that content, it seems like there's a continuation of a continuing watering down of the original intent of the natural features protection. And maybe an attorney can look at that and say, hey, you know, this was the intent, but what was sold to the general public is much differently. And I'm just not understanding why you need to make these changes, because it seems like it's becoming more and more pro-development and making it easier or making it clear for people to develop these areas and minimize the importance of our natural features. And if I listen to the community over and over and over again, it continues to come back to let's preserve our green spaces, let's preserve our parks, but which was originally sold for the natural protection overlay is to help achieve that.
Right. It was meant to.
But it continues to get watered down, and the language continues to change, and that's why I ask again the question, what is your definition of responsive?
Right. So it is what I just said. So being responsive to a natural feature is when you are looking, when you are preparing, if you're doing a development on your site, you understand, you have it defined, you figured out whether or not is a feature that's defined by the code, and then you follow the standards associated with it. You are being responsive to that feature on your site. If you do not have NFP on your property, by right, you do not need to be responsive to that feature, and you are free to do whatever you would like to develop that site. And so that's the difference between what happens in the overlay and what happens outside of the overlay.
Right, and I understand individual rights, but also what's the purpose of zoning for public good, correct?
There are many purposes of zoning, one of which is defined as the public good, yes.
Right, it's to try to limit and reduce the damage for the public good.
Manage conflicts, be clear to support things like economic vitality,
And so
housing
is this new
choices, all of those
is
things could be
this new
defined as public
language
good.
doing that?
I believe that the language that we have here makes the standards more clear. I believe it ties them back to the original intent and how we talked about it when it was being created. Yes,
That's your opinion.
that is my opinion.
Is that the city's opinion?
That is what is in the proposed draft of the zoning code. It was the language that was reviewed and discussed and supported by the Natural Features Protection Review Board.
So the new language was the original language?
This language that's in here, that is up on the screen right now, was reviewed by the Natural Features Protection Review Board at their last meeting, at the last two meetings, and confirmed as language that they feel is appropriate for
So
this
ultimately,
draft.
the Natural Features Review Board is the final decider, correct?
The City Commission is the final decider. I put forth the draft. It is reviewed by the Plan Commission, and then it is reviewed by the City Commission. So I put forth a draft that then goes out to the public for this kind of dialogue. We make edits, we continue to review, it goes forward to the Planning Commission, and then it goes to the City Commission. They have the final say in the document.
That's all I
Sure.
have.
Thanks, John. Can you go back to Tom? He had his back there, has his hand up. Lori, I'm trying to go in order. We had a gentleman back there with his. Are you sure? Okay. Great. Go ahead.
I'm Mary Spradling. I just was thinking about how you said there's no zoning in all the different zonings that sort of means we're just going to leave this piece of land alone. It's like that option doesn't even exist.
It does not currently exist in our zoning code. Yep.
Well, that seems really unrealistic. I mean, if you think about the Mississippi River and how it floods every year and how people built on it and, you know, they had to rebuild their homes like frequently. And they finally like realized, oh, duh, this is stupid. That's going to happen every year. Why don't we just stop building here? And now they have like actual floodplains where it can just flood and it doesn't hurt anything. And I'm thinking about this lady back here talking about how the Kalamazoo River floods. And it's going to do that every year or two or every, you know, couple years. Why not have a little zone on your choices of things where you could say, yeah, we're just not going to build there because it's going to flood.
Sure.
Or we're just not going to build there because that's a valley and it's too steep. Or we're just not going to build there because it's too close to Asylum Lake and it's going to drain into it or whatever. I mean, it just seems really weird that you don't have a single choice where you can just do nothing.
Thank you. Tom, did you want to make one more comment? And then we'll go to the phones.
Do support the idea. You said that other cities have additional district overlays that might be achieve, you know, the Oakwood lot. I think everybody supports that. I mean, there are a lot of details in the document that I've been going into, but the broad consensus is that we want more environmental protections, and if we can manufacture district overlays at will, for instance, new commercial overlays, then why not put forth the overlay you suggest other cities have that do more broadly protect the green spaces. So I definitely support that, and I think everybody at all of these meetings would support that in an act of good faith, considering that's what everybody talks about relentlessly. To the point of the relief valve of variance, I'm wondering if, and this is something I brought up at Kalamazoo College too, if there is a limitation to a relief valve variance request. So if somebody wants to build, and I'm only using this because it's a popular example, but a car wash on those two lots, and a slope is a notable feature on that lot, and the only way to, and it might be one of the most notable features on those two parcels, if the variance is to regrade that slope, and we have slope protections in our natural features, then could that be an example of a limitation within a variance request as a critical natural feature defined in the natural features overlay that's untouchable in variance requests?
The short answer is no. And that's more of a state enabling act rule than it is anything else. Anything in the zoning code needs to have a relief valve. We can help guide the, and this, let me take a step back, and the state lays out specific criteria that the Zoning Board of Appeals is supposed to use. So they review every case the same, right? And with the using the same criteria. We try in the zoning code to help guide how a variance is reviewed, right? We think of some additional standards, and those are on page 114 under relief of the NFP Overlay District Standards. Relief of the NFP Overlay District Standards may be sought from the Zoning Board of Appeals, and we give some additional criteria. At the end of the day, really it's those state criteria because those are the ones that are listed in enabling legislation, but we try here to guide, and we do it also in the parking section too, you know, when you might be able to, we're seeking relief in the maximum amount of parking might be viewed as appropriate, and we kind of list some of those things, and that is what we can do. So we can help guide it, but again, because it's in the zoning code itself, we follow those standards. And so and I think we've kind of talked about this a lot in all of our meetings. The zoning code is a great tool, but it has limitations, right? And so there have to be other layers that exist out there in order to do some of the things that have been suggested, that you're suggesting now, other types of regulation, whether it's local, state, or federal. The zoning code has its lane and its parameters, and we're trying to work within those.
Okay, thank you. My last little question is, does the city own, does somebody own this parcel that you're referring to at Oakwood? It's the Oakwood Neighborhood Association,
The Oakwood Neighborhood
right?
Association owns it, yeah.
Yeah, so, could the Oakwood Neighborhood Association request a zoning change
They could.
to this lot, which would basically undo whatever city planning would propose anyway?
Sure. So that property is zoned commercial and residential now. We're proposing to put in residential because the last conversation we had with the board was don't put it, if you have if it's two options right now because it's part commercial, part residential, don't pick the commercial. Yes, so someone can request a zoning change. Anyone can do that on their property. The district that we're kind of talking about in theory doesn't exist to be requested, right? So we'd have to first create that district. And if we were to create that district, what you're describing is how it would be used, right? The city would never proactively put it on somebody's property unless they were requesting it, because it would remove development rights, which is something that would be problematic in the eyes of the legal system.
All right, thank
Thank
you.
you.
I look forward to Oakwood
you.
having that option.
Sure.
Then.
Okay, Tina, last comment in-house, and then we'll see if anybody's on the phone, because we are running near the end.
I just kind of have one question.
Go ahead, Tina.
Is it true that Ellen's Lockhart Sylvester is on the NFP, and he is also the one in charge of Lockhart Management, who is working with Lisa Wilcott from Lift Foundation, who is destroying our last green space to build?
Sure. So the NFP board, I believe, has 7 members, and each has kind of a specific knowledge base, one of them being development. So there is a developer on the, someone who is used to developing, familiar with developing on the NFP board. That's how the board was set up. So yes, that exists. For everyone's reference, here and at home, we've been talking about a site regularly between Stockbridge and Lake. If you want to look at the site plan for that project, it's available online. You can go to the city's website and search site plans, and it has been posted there, so you can review it if you wish. That page also allows you to get alerts every time a site plan is posted. You can choose to do that by neighborhood, or you could choose to do it across the whole city. Then you automatically get those alerts. But just so everyone who's listening in, if you aren't familiar with this location or want more information, you can view the site plan online. Bobby, do you want to see if there are any callers with comments?
Yep, checking now. Does not appear to be so.
Okay, thank you, Bobby. We're not quite. Okay, well, hold on. I'm going to wrap up the meeting in just a second, and then there are definitely some edits that still need to be made. Just give me 1 second, and you can show me exactly where it is, and I will be happy to write it down and make sure that it's correct. I want to thank everyone for coming. Again, for those, if you know people who weren't here tonight that want to watch this meeting, it'll be posted on the city's YouTube channel for review, and I will independently get the PowerPoint up as well for folks to take a look at. This will be discussed at the Plan Commission again at their August meeting. I believe it is August 3rd. Yes, August 3rd. That is not a for-vote meeting. That is simply kind of the last big presentation before we start to move towards the approval phase. So public comment accepted. The board will be asking questions, I presume, and having a discussion. That will be kind of our last result in our last round of edits before we move towards a approval process. Like any other zoning, whether it's when it's requested by an applicant or done from city direction, all property owners will be noticed formally this time. Everyone received a postcard at the beginning of the process. Everyone will be getting a letter that talks if their property is being impacted, and we'll talk about dates for public hearings, where you can get more information, and all of those details. So that will be a requirement for us to do before we do the public hearing. And again, I expect that to be the September Plan Commission meeting. With that, thank you all for coming, and have a great evening. Did you have something that you wanted to show me? It's okay. It definitely needs to be proofread. It is not quite done.
I have 2 degrees, so
Yeah.
I catch things. This is supposed to be previous, and it's all through here.
Oh, it's supposed to be pervious.
Help me understand this then.
Sure.
Because
So-
previous, I don't know.
Areas required to be left as pervious, sure. And this is actually one that we do define at the beginning of the code. So when we think about.
I missed it. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
no, it's all good.
We went to the wrong place.
It's all good. I didn't go in detail, so over that. But at the very beginning of the document is a set of definitions, and we talk about what is pervious
Yeah, I
and what is
asked that lady,
semi-pervious.
and how will I find this?
Oh, sure. Go to imaginekalamazoo.com.
Which I did that, and I downloaded it on my phone.
Okay. Okay.
And she
so when
said
you
there's
go
a
to
way I
Imagine-
can get in here and actually sign up so I can get notices
That's
for
site plan.
meetings and all that.
You can for site plan, yes. So go to imaginekalamazoo.com, and then you want to go to projects. Sorry if I'm touching your
You're
phone.
fine.
Okay. Go to projects, and then zoning code map and update. If I hit it correctly.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's going to go to a page, and you can jump directly to the draft of the code. You can jump directly to the map.
This?
Yep. And it's further down the page, but that will just take you there immediately.
So this is what you were looking at?
This is a copy of this document. Yep. And it's divided, so you don't have to download the giant document. You can do it in pieces and look at each individual piece.
So these are ones you
That's
guys
the
have
old one.
corrected already?
Right. That was the one that we released first. And then that one is before. This is just like some one-pager, quick
Okay.
informations on the
So
zoning district.
can people come and help fix these things?
If you see things, you should send them my way. Absolutely.
How do I send them to you?
Sure.
'Cause actually, I have a bachelor's in organization management with a minor in family life education.
Ooh.
And
You
I
okay with
have-
the big piece of paper?
That's fine. And I have a master's in IO psychology. I'm the
Ooh, and
oldest
what?
I have a master's in industrial organization.
Industrial organization. I wasn't sure what IO
psychology,
was.
And I'm the oldest of 12 kids from
Oh, my
4
goodness.
broken homes. I've been a mom since I was 2 and a half. So efficiency and
Yes, I
efficacy is
get
what I
it.
do.
Okay, so that is my email address. So
Okay.
Anderson is my last name, c@kalamazoocity.org.
Okay.
So you can send me
I will
questions.
email you.
You
I
can
will
send me
email you.
comments. It's fine. I gave the document to a whole bunch of people in the office, and I'm like, take your red pen and go for it. Like, you're not going
I'm
to
a
hurt my
purple
feelings. Okay, purple pen is fine. Hi, Lori. How are you?
How can one get a list of the email addresses of the planning commissioners?
We don't give out the email addresses of the plan commissioners. We just don't. Because they're not elected, they're volunteers. So we do that at the city commission level, but not plan commission level. So, and not ZBA level.
I'm just concerned
If you would like to get them,
Commissioners themselves have been at none of these meetings. You're the one
They-
that gets dumped on.
I mean, they have been at several. They weren't at this
The
one.
last one, there's none at this one.
We had several at the last one. At Edison, we had the mayor was there briefly. We had 2 commissioners, 1 NFP member. So they are coming.
The Dormouse Theater?
Yeah. Yep. Gene Hess, Don Cuny. They didn't ask for hands at that meeting. They did at a previous meeting, and there weren't at the first one, and no one was there. No one was at the. No one in that category was at the library, but they did come to both the K College and. Yep, you just send it and send it to. Oh, absolutely. Yep, you send them to us. We collect all the letters. We put them with the packet. and they go out that way.
So they should just be addressed
Yeah, Planning Commission. Yep. Yes, yeah. I would encourage people to send them when there is the topic, right? Because I think those are most effective because it's in their mind, they're reviewing something. We were happy to give them to them anytime, but if they don't have that on their packet,
So when is their July meeting?
it is, it's been moved and it's posted. It's going to be July 20th. We have a couple of, there's a daycare special use request. I think that's it. It's the only public case.
And then there's the one in August, which is going
August
to be
3rd.
the public hearing.
Nope. The one in August is just a presentation.
Okay. And September is the
September
public
right
hearing,
now is when we'll do the
when
public
people
hearing.
who want
Yes,
to be heard.
like, yeah. Well, they can come in August too, but there won't be any action. There's not proposed to be any action taken that night. It is
Okay.
simply, it's another presentation, right? For the Plan Commission members, they're looking at everything, right? And it's a lot of material. So
Oh,
we've
God,
tried to
yeah.
go as slow as possible, you know, and we did small presentations to everybody, March, April, May. We're giving them a break. Then we're going to do it all at once in August as a way to kind of break it into pieces that are manageable for them. Because at the end of the day, they're the ones who have to look at the
I guess,
155
my
pages.
concern is that you are the one, like I say, who's
Yeah.
always getting dumped on, but
You know,
the actual commission.
guess that's my job.
The last commission I was at, they were barely scraped together.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we knew we were going. We knew we weren't going to have quorum that night, or that it was going to be very close. Yeah, that's pretty unusual for Plan Commission.
The thing, I just, as a citizen, I think I said this to you at the meeting at
Right. Bye guys. Are you talking about the country club property? Balance, I think, was one of the words that was being suggested. Well, it's, you're showing some. Right, and it does have protection, but it's protection that is part of the zoning code. Right, so it does, it works within its lane, but it is not.
It's, if there's, you want to
Yeah, I guess I don't see it as weakening, I see it as clarifying.
have some assurance of what they're proposing or what they want to do,
Yeah.
or if through development.
Yeah, oh, it is, absolutely.
So I guess my concern was,
Yeah, and we absolutely keep it in mind. Yeah.
like, if a business,
coming to this meeting and reminding people.
Right. And all of those changes that were, those are the things that got changed. Well, but that's what a public process is. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, I didn't know you were going to be on that.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah.
So they can't give it,